Hi guys, here we are. First of all, I don't have any previous material to really bring up, which is like a first, but I think it's going to be interesting as we get into this very last portion of Matthew. The hinge here is, it could be the Last Supper, or it can also be when Christ laments over Jerusalem. And that's more of that midway point. Is when Christ laments over Jerusalem. He talks about like how much I wanted to like gather you like a hen gathers her chicks. But today, for all of you who have been asking, the answer is yes. Today, we're actually going to get into some scribal understanding. So I am really excited about this. I don't know if you actually, no, this is actually really exciting. So let's go ahead and take a little bit of a fun journey. Do you remember something about some sort of like stone and sun used together in any way, shape, or form? It's in Matthew 21. And I will find the verse exactly. Okay, verse 42. The stone that the builders rejected has now become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing, and this is wonderful to see. Let's see something, shall we? So we're going back into Hebrew. Okay, so what is the word for sun? Anybody? S-O-N, sun? In Hebrew? Ben. Uh-huh. Yeah, sun. Ben, right? Or being. And so you would have, ben is the construct form. That's a grammar thing, not getting into it. Bane, right, is the actual original word. So it means sun. I wonder what this means. So we got a little bit of wordplay going on in Matthew, as well as a link also to the Old Testament as well. The stone that the builders rejected is like it's really funny that we have. It's just one word different between sun and stone, and it's
Son of man.
What?
Son of man.
Son of man is this.
No. What I mean is son of man is the stone.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Oh, we're going to get into so much wordplay today. I am actually really excited about this. Okay. So, remember when I said that we are going to be encountering a little bit of spiritual kung fu between the Pharisees and the Sadducees in Jesus. And this, remember the situation too, that Jesus, some guy from the, basically the way they viewed it was like some guy from the boondocks, decided to come up to the temple, overturn the tables, cause the biggest scene ever, not to mention the person that brought the table into the temple was Caiaphas. This just like, so he did this, right? He didn't cause a scene at all. And so it was from this that this was the beginning. This was the acceleration to his death. Remember before we were talking about like how the Pharisees that tried to fight against him before didn't seem to be all too successful. I mean, quite obviously, if he could still go into Jerusalem and the Romans didn't have anything to do with him really until he started really causing a scene. What was that scene? That was definitely the temple. And an easy way to explain this one, and now I have gone over all the notes from the sermon series. So hopefully what we're doing today is more of a condensing of what the sermon series is talking about. So this is, a lot of this information comes from that. A way it was described was that Jesus was so angry because he could not handle the people being cheated and manipulated to think that what they honestly were trying to do the right thing, but the way that it was done only padded the wallets of others. This is infuriating to Christ, which is so interesting that churches commonly do this today. I actually know of a church in our area that is selling parking spaces for $10,000 a piece. And no, maybe it's $1,100, but they're selling parking spaces.
For what?
They're for parking.
What do you mean? You go to church
at church with a reserved parking space. I know the specific church in question.
By the chief seat of the synagogue.
and it's like, I don't think that any of them from that church will be watching this, but still, it's something that is, Jesus would be overturning the tables at that point. Like, if you were to see that. Well, of course he sees it. But it's like, that is like so, it's so crazy to think of how very pharisaical we are in our modern society. That's what we're going to talk about today, too. But anyway, I'm pumped for this one. It will be also heavy on the emotions. I don't know if this is going to spill over into next week, but I'm pumped for this one, but it's going to get intense. So without further ado, we were looking at the Matthew 21 when he overturned the tables, right? Now, that we also talked about like how they laid the stuff on the laid the clothes and like the branches on the ground, very garden-like imagery. It's interesting how they laid their garments on the ground as well. The thing kind of similar to the idea of like how God like their coverings. They put their coverings onto the ground and the branches and all that stuff. It's really interesting imagery. Not to mention the donkey thing, which has correlations with David as well with the normally kings would ride on like more esteemed like steeds. But this is interesting how it's already a demarcation of him going the lower route of things. Now, the let me see what I have some notes here that I did want to touch on. Oh yes, the fig tree. A lot of really interesting stuff. Does anybody have like what have you guys heard about the fig tree before? Like the meaning of the fig tree? There are two things that I never heard in church before until one of them was from the sermon series and the other one was from a Messianic congregation. But besides them, I have never heard these different explanations before. Anybody have anything they want to say about that fig tree?
The thing I remember is the one fig tree was dead.
Yes.
It died, and Jesus said that it will never produce life.
It was not in the right season. It was not in the right season for it to produce fruit. That was what it was.
But I thought there was two, and the one he said would never
produce fruit
again.
Was not in the proper season. So it was like, imagine it being late fall. But it's not. It's like, imagine it being late fall, and it's like you go to an apple tree that's clearly not producing apples at that point, and say you will never make fruit again. And that is a strange image. It's a very strange image. So does anybody have any explanations that they've heard before why he chose a tree that was clearly not in the right season?
Yeah, the one I heard was... Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No one had anything to say.
I can't remember what
I can't remember, she said.
Yeah. Thank you.
When one of the ones I heard was that there was leaves on the fig tree, but there was no fruit, and the fruit should be there with the leaves. So it was a fruitless tree, but it just appeared to be having fruit. That was one thing I've heard about it.
I just read that too. I didn't forget where it was.
I've heard that one before. Anybody else?
I heard another one recently, but I don't remember the details, so I can't tell you.
It's probably one of the ones that I have in my head right now. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You know,
that it was symbolic of Israel.
it was symbolic of Israel.
Oh,
That's one of
absolutely.
the
Absolutely.
It was symbolic of Israel because it's like Israel should always be producing fruit. And and so what Christ was saying was, may you never do this again. And it withered. It's like so that's one thing. But there's another one from the Messianic congregation that I think is interesting. Is in the Garden of Eden, trees bore fruit all the time. There was they just had fruit, right? And it ties into this explanation that we just did with Israel bearing fruit. So it's tied in, and that if the fig tree is supposed to always be bearing fruit based on Edenic imagery, and we are it's a symbol of how we are to be similar and similar to us not letting our oil run dry, or that concept is that we're always producing fruit. That's why there's a lot of fruit imagery. This was the beginning. He had just entered Jerusalem, and he told a fig tree that you will be dry. Actually, it's also a correlation to Isaiah, when there was a mention of stinky fruit. So it's not just no fruit. Isaiah was saying it stinks. And no, please, by all means.
I was thinking, if what I was putting together with that, I was getting.
I'm sorry, Micah, not Isaiah.
No, from what I heard about it, what I was getting was that it was kind of like the parable of the virgins, that their oil had run out, and the tree wasn't prepared for the Messiah to arrive. It wasn't bearing fruit.
That's another one. I think it's similar.
Yeah,
I think it's very similar.
And he was saying, because you aren't bearing fruit and I'm here, but basically he had nowhere to lay his head.
You got it.
The same thing.
It's
so
very similar.
He cursed the tree because it wasn't ready for his arrival spiritually.
This is so cool to me because all these symbols that we're talking about before are starting to make their manifestation right now.
It wasn't that he hated the tree. It was
no. Exactly. And the two prophetic books in question are Micah and Isaiah. Isaiah was the one that called it stinky fruit. Micah also has a prophetic image regarding fig trees. And you're absolutely right. So why? And it's interesting that the first thing he does is overturn the tables in the temple. So he comes into Jerusalem. Follow my train of thought. He comes into Jerusalem. He's not approaching like any normal king, except for David. He's very much like David at this point. Then he goes into the temple and overturns the tables, and then he curses. The first thing he really does after overturning the tables was he curses a fig tree directly after turning over the table. I wonder if there's any correlation there. And it's remember what we said before, is when something strange happens, it's usually good to look just before it to see what the context is in this regard. And here, it's he's definitely telling Israel, it's done. This human type of existence, it's getting turned on its head right now. And it's so you just did that with the temple, which was the normal way of going about things at the time, with Caiaphas at least. And then he goes in and he tells a fig tree that normally doesn't produce fruit at a certain time to dry up. And then he goes, and then I'm sorry. And then he mentions the faith thing about the mountain. Now, there are two explanations for the mountain thing. One is this. About faith, a lot of people do talk about this, about faith to move mountains. I do believe that. However, there's a specific reference to this one as well. We've talked before about double entendres, and double entendres, double meanings.
Yeah.
So what did he just tell us to dry up? A tree. What is another? So a tree is a symbol of the garden. What is another symbol of God's heavenly realm on earth? where were the Ten Commandments presented?
On the mountain.
On a mountaintop. And what is he talking about directly after forcing a tree to wither? He's talking about a mountain. He's talking about the Temple Mount will be turned on its head. And so so this is like, oh, we're getting into some really cool nitty-gritty. So, now, and he's also making a difference of how much you can do with faith. It's like, so we're getting into the double meanings of things. So, so he's saying you can move this mountain and tell it to throw itself into the sea. What is the sea? Chaos. You're casting it into, it's like the symbols are really, I told you guys just to wait for a few weeks, and we're finally getting at a lot of the imagery coming back into action. I love it. So this is the hub of the Sanhedrin. So I wonder what they would have done when they saw him overturning the tables, looking at the tree and saying, dry up, and then saying about the Temple Mount, toss it into the sea. I wonder what the Sanhedrin was thinking at this time. So, oh, look at this. The next section has to do with his authority being challenged. And so they go to the leading priests and elders came up to him. They demanded, by what authority are you doing all these things? All these things. What things? Remember, going back to what we said, return back to the previous statement. This will become very important later in the epistles as well. So, whenever you, a lot of people, take an epistle verse way too far out of context. And it's there is a lot of truth in a single verse, but there's a lot more, double entendres and stuff like that come from reading the whole thing in context, especially things that come beforehand. And this is an example of this. So, he says, I'll tell you by what authority. It's almost like he's going, I'll tell you by what authority I do these things. If you answer one question. So, this is the very, very first time that Christ pushes a question. This is where the beginning of spiritual kung fu. So, this is where he's playing into the debating nature of how the Sanhedrin would go about things. And it wasn't just it was just the different camps of the Pharisees and the Sadducees that would engage in these types of Socratic debate. Did John's authority to baptize come from heaven, or was it merely human? Notice it's in the form of a riddle, kind of, sort of. It's actually a very simple question. Really, it is. But it's very similar in stature to, if a man dies and has 7 wives, or if a woman dies and has 7 husbands, which one will be hers? I forget exactly what yes.
This question is a knife fork.
But the thing is, though, the questions that they presented him up to this point were also meant to trap him.
Yeah.
And now he's presenting a question that's trapping them. And so it's he tried this with me, and he always had an answer, always, that just messed with their heads. And so he presents his one question, and they respond, we don't know.
Yeah.
I have no idea where I come from.
Genesis 1 had to do with the founding of a garden. And 2 had to do with a very similar story about where man came from. In chapter 3, God said, do not eat of this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So when they come back to him and they said, let me ask you this one question, they come back to him and say, we don't know. I wonder if there's a pattern that we're reading here in chapter 21. So, The ones who think that they know, reply, we don't know. And, indeed. So this is really, really interesting here. Now, of course, they were like huddled together and coming up, but and they were sly in their response. And so it's very, everything's coming to a head. And then we get into a new round of parables. And so, like but notice this time, though, what is different about the parables here versus the parables we encountered before? There's a stark difference between the way that these parables are presented versus the former parables.
I think it was like an attack on the establishment at the time.
Okay, no, it's fine. It's fine. I was just wondering. If it's actually in a how? Okay.
It was
right.
Confrontational.
It was, yes. You're almost there. You're almost there. So when Christ was in parables before, what happened as a response?
Oh, the people were amazed at his teaching.
And the disciples asked him what something meant.
Yeah, what does it mean?
What are you doing with these parables?
I'm assuming they didn't ask.
He is asking them. He is asking, and he's saying, so which one obeyed his father? So similar questions that they used to present him, he's now presenting them in the form of parables. And it's getting good.
He's also just tying them up in knots.
He is. He absolutely is. This is the moment. He's not holding back anymore. Remember before he was like, shh, don't tell. But now he's like, here we go. This is it. And notice, and definitely tying them up in knots, and they're just getting angrier and angrier. Not to mention he's getting frustrated as well. I mean, obviously, like he turned over the table. And so, anyway, and actually it's funny because there's some manuscripts that say that their answer was the second. And then it's like in another manuscript the first one says yes, but doesn't matter. The point is they were confused. And so corrupt tax collectors and prostitutes, now this is a huge point, will get into the kingdom of God before you do, not instead of you. Okay? This is like a big misconception. And he's still very much approaching them in a loving manner. He's playing their own game. He's being very sarcastic. But he's doing so to try to stir them up here. He is just like with God and Pharaoh when he gave him 10 opportunities to let the people go. And Christ is doing very similar things, playing them at their own game, and trying to get them to understand. Because remember, their first answer was, "We don't know." So he plays into the game, and he starts actually like pushing them and trying to get them to a certain realization, and trying to educate them. This is how they got education. If you go to law school today, they use the Socratic method in order to teach students. Like all it is a round of questions and presentations and like hypotheticals. And this is very much how they learned. That was their education system. So he's trying to educate them in their own system. So anyway, so then we got the parable.
Teaching the teachers.
Exactly. Some guy from the sticks.
Right. Exactly. It's really, really
interesting. Everything's really getting over. Remember what fig tree is told to wither when it's not supposed to be bearing fruit in the first place, telling the mountain to go jump in water. And we have like him overturning the tables. He is overturning everything. So he says, he gives the explanation of that parable, and then he goes into the one about the evil farmer, and he just keeps going. And so he gives this whole spiel, and then so then he says at the very bottom, so they grabbed him, dragged him out of the vineyard, and murdered him. When the owner of the vineyard returns, Jesus asked, what do you think he will do to those farmers? So it's another question. The religious leaders replied, he will put the wicked man to a horrible death and lease the vineyard to others who will still give him his share of the crop after each harvest. Wait a second. This is a parable about vineyards, right? Huh. So you got a garden. And so, but now what he's talking about? It goes, about a father and the son being murdered from the gardening perspective, and then he's bringing up like the cornerstone, and it's like he's using of the temple. These different, all of the different images are flying back together. I love his response. Did you not read your scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has now become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing, and it's wonderful to see. I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to whom?
The people who will produce fruit. Another fig tree.
Yeah.
But wait, you're getting like 3 different images right here. So I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a nation. Like a nation. Remember what he did for the Canaanites. Remember what, like, this is like, it's like he's taking this reward from Israel and giving it to others because the fig tree has dried up. And so anyone who stumbles over that, so given to a nation that will produce the proper fruit, anyone who stumbles over that stone, remember it can also be a play on word for son, will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone it falls on. There are 2 ways to look at that. One is, think about it like when the word of the Lord pierces us, it kills us, right? Like I was killed, quote unquote, when I was baptized. This cornerstone has crushed me. So it's also, there is a double entendre here, like another double meaning. So it's like it will crush you no matter what, but you can still produce the proper fruit. Anyone who stumbles over that stone, well, this is the cornerstone, but if you stumble over it and it crushes you, crushing. I wonder if that was brought up anywhere in Genesis. The head of a snake. Oh. We finally made it to all the different images coming back together. And I love it. These 2 verses here pack a punch. Yeah, we got like 6 chapters left of this book. Anyway, so
I like verse 45. It's like, you think?
Oh, I was just about to get to that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. No, you're fine. That's awesome. I love it because you're reading ahead. This is the pump has been primed, I guess you could say, for us to actually see Hear
Shema.
and understand, or understand actually in the Hebrew way, the what's happening. So, no wonder they were kicked off. And so it's like, so he says, let me ask you, and remember the first question is like, let me ask you a question about like the whole thing about like what John the Baptist was talking about, and they said, we don't know. But yet he still asked questions after he said, I'm not going to tell you by what authority, but he demonstrates it through parables.
Mm-hmm.
And and remember, this is in stark contrast to when he presented parables to the masses and said, and then you had people coming up to him and asking what this meant, and he gladly explained it. So anyway, when the leading priests and Pharisees heard this parable, they realized he was telling the story. Wickedness, the snake is being crushed, and it's like, and they, who are the ones stumbling right now? They are. Mm-hmm. And this is like, so of course they got it, because he was playing their game. And so anyway, they wanted to, what, yeah?
I find them interesting in that, because this was their way of debate. It's interesting that he's talking for quite a while to them. He's talking and they're listening. They're actually listening. They don't like it, but they're listening. It's like they can't help themselves. It's like, what's he going to say next? They're just like, they can't help themselves. And then they get mad because they don't like what they hear. But
because they were
but they can't help themselves. They're listening. Because that's what they do.
It's an interesting dynamic. It's like he got under their skin just as much as they did him. Anyway, then you have the parable of the great feast. And here he doesn't ask questions. He just doesn't. He just presents one. And he basically does it because at this point they knew that he was talking about them. So then he presents this big parable about like the people who are lowly are the ones that are invited to the great feast, while the other ones are shut out because they had the opportunity, but they thought they had better things to do. And so this, I wonder if he's still talking about them. So, anyway, the bulls and fattened cattle have been killed, and everything is ready. Come to banquet. But the guests he invited ignored him and went their own way. One to his farm, another to his business. Others seized the messengers and insulted them and killed them. Messengers, that's an interesting word to use as well. The messengers of a king. So, okay. So this parable in and of itself is very easy to understand. Remember, parables are not allegories, but they are allegorical. And usually, though, I came across another explanation. Usually, a good way to understand the difference between a parable and an allegory is a parable you can put yourself in. Like, you can actually see your role in this. And it's like, they're used as ways of self-evaluation. And it's like, who are you? Are you the ones that are that turn away, or are you the ones that are on the street that God calls in? And it's or are you a servant that calls people? It's like it's like, where do you fit into this? Not necessarily everyone else. It's the primary focus is you at this point. All right. So he already like obliterated a system of thinking. So now we have another system of thinking, Caesar. So there, we talked ad nauseum about Julius Tiberius Augustus, Julius Augustus and Tiberius. There we go. The concept of Caesar. So he pulled out a coin. We have coins. What are the faces on the coins usually? Not always, but usually on our coins.
Presidents, historical figures.
Yeah, presidents and very important historical figures that shaped America into what it is today. And it's similar. And, but it's more. So much more. Who were the Caesars considered to be? Like, what were they considered to be? Kings as well as, it's obvious,
Deities.
gods. Yeah, they were considered gods in their own right. Not necessarily to the extent of a pharaoh, like the way that the Egyptians thought of it, but close. They would have temples to worship the king or the emperor, and a head that was presented like a bust on a coin. It's like a portable idol. And so this is they use this. That is why it was such a burn to use similar looking coins for the temple tax. And it's really there's a lot of politics at the time happening here. So the Pharisees, remember, they were the ones that were kind of sort of okay with, for the most part, with the occupation. They didn't like it, but they dealt with it. They lived under its authority, I guess you could say, and they at times, I wouldn't they definitely brown nosed as well, and they especially did with Christ. So like when it came to them wanting to kill him. So they said, and I love how they go up to him and they say, "Teacher," they said, "we know how honest you are. You teach the way of God truthfully. You are impartial and don't play favorites. Now, tell us what you think. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? You're wonderful, you're righteous," and the trapping question behind it. You can feel the sarcasm now. This is the first time they're so biting. Before, they would actually legitimately ask questions, or they would try to trap him. This is the first time they directly attacked him verbally in this sense. Because what they were basically were, okay, because before they went up to Peter and said, does he pay the temple tax? Like, that was one thing, right? But this time, it was biting. That type of, like, we know you're so impartial. We know the good things you teach. So, do you pay taxes to Caesar or not? Yeah.
I have an observation on this too.
Yes, please do.
That this was on the heels of him night forking them with a question, and they were like, they didn't answer it because they couldn't. Either way they went, they were caught, and so they didn't answer it because they didn't want the people to hear the answer. And so, but in this one, they thought they were clever, and they came out with their night fork question, and he answered it.
Yeah, yeah, we're gonna get to the answer as well.
I mean, I think that's just kind of like diametrical. I mean,
yeah.
They were afraid to answer him, but he's like, "Oh, I'll give you an answer."
Yeah. What is the first thing he said to them in response?
Why do you test me?
No, before that.
Bring me a coin. Where are we?
Hypocrites.
Yeah, that's what he said. Why do you test me?
You hypocrites. It goes back. Oh, so it might be but yeah, he's what he said to me, you hypocrites. Yeah. Like,
then he says, "Bring me the coin." Yeah, bring me the money.
There is a special meaning of the word hypocrite. I'm looking for it right here. I have it somewhere. The word hypocrite has a special meaning. I'm trying to find it. I'm trying to remember what it is offhand. It's like I can't find it right now. I'll find it probably during the run. Oh, I do have this word. The word that was used for speechless, like, and they were speechless, can also be understood as were without excuse. And that's an interesting nuance of a term. And the word hypocrite has a special meaning. Hold on. I might not be able to find it, but there's like a... If I can't find it, that's okay. But it definitely had a different way of looking at the term. I think it was something like... It was something that was like not as biting. Give me 1 second, I'm gonna look. Okay, well, I'm not able to find it now, but that's okay. Like, hypocrite is a good translation. It was just like a nuance of, like, instead of speechless, it was like or without excuse. It was similar to something like that. But I don't speak Greek, so. Nor do I study it yet. So, like, I can't speak Hebrew either, but, like, you know. But anyway, if I can find it during break, I'll mention it. All right, so he says, well then, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. This has to do with more like, okay, so what is God's? What is Caesar's? So it's like, yeah, of course, we're called to be good citizens in the land that we live in. Jeremiah talks about that. Like, yeah, there's an interesting nuance here as well, though, when it comes to it. Okay, yeah, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Cool. Like, it's like he's asking for a tax, and that's technically his, and this is part of his kingdom and like his empire and stuff like that. What is God? Everything. Absolutely everything. So it's like, make sure that don't you give it up. You give up what is Caesar's, and you give to God what is God, yourself. Like you throw yourself at him, and you relinquish the things that are of Caesar. And it's a different way of looking at it that I'm not used to looking at it. And it's I like it. So, and then we got resurrection. So we went through the Pharisaical way of doing things. That failed. So then they came back with a biting question about, okay, what about the empire? Yeah, he had an answer for them. Okay, Sadducees, your turn. And remember, okay. Oh, this is it. If a man dies without children, his brother should marry the widow and have a child who will carry on the brother's name. But suppose there are 7 brothers. The oldest one married and died without children. And because your mistake is that you don't know the scripture. And you don't know the power of God. For when the dead rise, they'll neither marry nor be given in marriage. In this respect, they'll be like angels in heaven. There's a really cool way of looking at this. And this does come from the sermon series. When you are in the womb, when you're and you are you're feeding from the umbilical cord and all that stuff, and then you are born, and then the light hits you, and it's hard for you to breathe, but you're breathing air for the first time, and then this crazy stuff happens where you get dry, you get patted down and dried. Is the baby still the same baby?
Yes.
But it went through a drastic transformation. And this is what's being referenced here. Is that when we rise, it's are we still the same? In essence, yes. But there's a drastic transformation. And we were talking before about like the correlation of like when God forgets sin in terms of like the Old Testament ways. It's not that remember, Hebrew loves to make hyperbole. And so there's a section where it says, as far as the east is from the west, God will remember their sins no more. Well, he clearly did. Otherwise, he wouldn't otherwise he wouldn't have to die. Otherwise, when Christ rises in his new body, he still has like holes in him. And it's more like, why would every tear need to be wiped from our eyes if we don't remember? And there's a lot that goes into like there's something. So this is a concept that he's really throwing into their faces when it comes to resurrection. And he's basically saying it doesn't matter because there's going to be so much of a transformation that, but like we'll still be similar, but that not at the same time. And he says, and this is after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had died, God said, and we already talked about this section. We talked about it for the past few weeks, so I'm not going to dwell on it. But he said, he's the God of the living, not the dead. And when the crowds heard him, they were astonished at his teaching. So then, next verse, but when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees with his reply, only met together to question him. They met together to question him again. So we are definitely in the Kung Fu thing. So it's like you got one person going and trying to fight and then loses, and then the other guy comes in like, well, that one's like resting, like that tag team. Yeah, the tag team. This is the week before the Passover. This is huge. So when the Pharisees heard that he had, not to mention a lot of people are there. That's why now we're talking about crowds of people. But when the Pharisees heard that he silenced the Sadducees, an expert in religious law came to him and the teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses. And here you have it. So this is where he equates the two. Basically he's saying, if you love God, you'll love your neighbor. And if you love your neighbor, you're loving God. That's basically how he presents it. And that everything is based on those two. The two become one. And so this is and then surrounded by the Pharisees, Jesus asked him a question. What do you think? Jesus, with everyone around, he has the Pharisees around him, says, what do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he? And they replied, he's the son of David. And he said, then why does David, speaking of the inspiration of the Spirit, call the Messiah my Lord? For David said, the Lord said to my Lord. So anyway, since David called the Messiah my Lord, how can the Messiah be his son? And no one could answer him. There is a lot to be said about that one. From what I understand, there's a big debate because don't tell me they didn't know this. But because the Lord said to my Lord. I'm going to pause on that, and I'll come back to this because I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it. Because obviously they knew the scripture, and notice that what happens directly after this, he goes on a tirade. Chapter 23 is a tirade of criticisms, and this, from what I understand, is the hinge point with that. There's something there that I'm still trying to wrap my mind around because they knew that it said the Lord said to my Lord, and I have to. And I'm going to come back to this, but there's something really interesting there. But So just trust me, I'm still digging on my own. I go my own on that one. But oh, the sermon series had a really cool thing here, though, to explain how similarly mind-blowing things could be. The person giving the sermon was a white person from South Africa. So he is technically an African. He became an American. So he was technically an African American. And so he had children. And if his wife and he had children, would they be African American? Imagine how enraged people would be if they insisted on calling their children African American. And this is a similar way of looking at how intense this was, but it was like more so. But yeah, I remember it's very because it's true, right? They would be African American, but definitely not by the way American society defines it. So anyway, all right, I'll come back to this one. Chapter 23. If you look at your Bible, if you have a red text Bible, the first sentence is black. The whole rest of it is red. This is huge. I'm going to read it. And I want you to think to yourselves. Think to yourselves two things. Because this is how we should self-evaluate. First, is a congregation or congregations that I am with, or just the church in general, like the American church, just think about it from that way. Or other congregations that I know that are Christian, are they behaving in such a way? Two, am I behaving in such a way? Okay, so the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees are the official interpreters of the law of Moses. So practice and obey whatever they tell you, but don't follow their example. For they don't practice what they teach. They crush people with unbearable religious demands and never lift a finger to ease the burden. Everything they do is for show. On their arms, they wear extra wide prayer boxes with scripture verses inside, and they wear robes with extra long tassels. And they love to sit at the head table at banquets and in the seats of honor in the synagogues. They love to receive respectful greetings as they walk in the marketplaces and to be called teacher. Don't let anyone call you teacher, for you have only one teacher, and all of you are equal as brothers and sisters. And don't address anyone here on earth as Father. Only God in heaven is your Father. Notice who says don't address anyone here on earth. What about your earthly father? Oh yeah, remember that whole statement where it says you're going to hate your mother and father like that? Remember, a slight bit of hyperbole in here as well. Just a slight bit. Anyway. And don't let anyone call you teacher, for you have only one teacher, the Messiah. It's funny. Don't call anyone teacher. Don't call anyone father. Don't call anyone teacher. It's like but the word here for teacher is a different word. The Messiah. The greatest among you must be a servant. Who's the greatest among us? It's Christ himself. So he was, and so. But those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites! Oh, I wonder if it's actor. It can also mean actor, like you actors. Like so. Actors, for you shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You won't go in yourselves, and you won't let others in either. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees. Actors, for you cross land and sea to make one convert. The Pharisees did proselytize. Not much. Christians doing a lot more. But think about the Christian way of doing this. For you cross land and sea to make one convert, and then you turn that person into twice the child of Gehenna as you yourselves are. So he's basically saying you cross to get one convert, and then twice the child of Gehenna. That was where child sacrifice was performed, right? Blind guides. So no longer is he saying actors. Now he's saying blind guides. What sorrow awaits you, for you say that it means nothing to swear by God's temple, but that it's binding to swear by the gold in the temple. Blind fools. Which is more important, the gold of the temple, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? This is, I explained this before when we were in the Sermon on the Mount. Basically, it's like, don't swear by anything. Like just say yes or no. And so it's the same thing with like the swearing thing here. Verse 23. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, actors, for you are careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb garden, but you ignore the more important aspects of the law: justice, mercy, and faith. You should tithe, yes, but do not. It's interesting too that he says faith, because what do they think they're doing when they are tithing? It's being faithful. And in justice, they think that that's justice. And mercy, like every 3 years, 10% will go to the poor in need. So, and faith, you should tithe, yes, but don't neglect the more important things. Blind guides, you strain your water so that you won't accidentally swallow a gnat, but you swallow a camel. Hyperbole. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, actors, for you're so careful to clean the outside of the cup. Notice anything happening here? I wonder if Matthew, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, is bringing back subjects that we've already talked about. Like, so these are things that are it's like a flashback to what he's done his entire ministry. It's like you're seeing like flashbacks of his teachings coming back into full force here. I believe Christ said these things because he clearly talked about them to other audiences, and it's more like his teaching became more perfected as it got to this point. And like I love that. Like it's like heavy hitter now. You're so but inside you're filthy, full of greed and self-indulgence, you blind Pharisee. First wash the inside of the cup and the dish, and then the outside will become clean too. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, actors, for you're like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside. It's a similar image from the previous one. Beautiful on the outside, but filled on the inside with dead bones. So anyway, in all sorts of impurity. Remember, Christ is trying to wake them up. What happened to the dry bones of Ezekiel? So he's trying to put flesh on them. He's trying to give them a heart of flesh. Outwardly, you look like righteous people, but inwardly, your hearts are filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness. What sorrow awaits you teachers of religious law and you Pharisees, actors, for you build tombs. So notice there's like a train of thought here. And I love the poetic line. Remember we're talking about parallelism and amplification. Parallelism. We got the straining of things, right? Just bear with me. Do you remember? We would be like A kind of leads to B, and then you have like a repetition of B, and then it kind of leads to like a repetition of the second B. So it's like a C, and it's like an amplification. I wonder if that's happening here. We got the straining of water and the eating of a camel. And then talking about, oh, you strain water. Well, where would you strain water? Into a bowl? Oh, well, wait a second. Clean the inside of the bowl first, right? And then talking about clean the inside of your tube. And so it's an amplification. And then it's like a slight twisting of the same idea. Talking about...
They do that in Greek?
He's talking to.
Okay.
To them. Okay. So, of course, he would be using their language.
Okay.
This is written in Greek. But the parallelism is very much the same. This is like because a lot of Hebrew words were also put into the Greek of the New Testament. Like the Koine Greek that is used in the Bible has a lot of Hebrew influence. So because of the Septuagint. But anyway, not Greek itself, but the Greek used here. So and then he says like, oh, so after talking about cleaning up the bones and tombs. Oh, speaking of tombs. Let's talk, like, what sorrow awaits you if you build tombs for the prophets and you decorate the monuments on the outside of the godly people your ancestors destroyed? Then you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would never have joined them in killing the prophets. How many people say today that if they were alive during the time of Jesus? But in saying that, you testify against yourselves that you are indeed the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead and finish what your ancestors started. Snakes. So, the ancestors. Go ahead and finish what your ancestors started in the seed of the snake. So anyway, snakes, sons of vipers. How will you escape the judgment? Therefore, I'm sending you, and he started this whole spiel with the cornerstone crushing them. Therefore, I am sending you prophets and wise men and teachers of religious law. But you will kill some by crucifixion, and you will flog others with whips in your synagogues, chasing them from city to city. As a result, you'll be held responsible for the murder of all godly people of all time, from the murder of righteous Abel to the murder of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you killed in the temple between the sanctuary and the altar. I tell you the truth, this judgment will fall on this very generation. Like, right now. Anyway, right now, and then like a few decades later, you have the temple, and then like all the craziness that happened from there. Oh dear, there's a lot of stuff that happened. But anyway, and then, bam. So he smacked at them, smacked down, used parallelism, used amazing imagery. And then he says, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones God's messengers. How often I have wanted to gather your children together as a hen protects her chicks beneath her wings, but you wouldn't let me. And now look, your house is abandoned and desolate. For I tell you this, you will never see me again until you say blessings on the one who comes in the name of the Lord. So, I think that's a good place to take a little break. This is the hinge, by the way. This is what I believe is more of the hinge to the end, because he says you won't see me again until after this point, and then it's like from here on, it's like this is it. So let's go ahead and take a little break. We might actually go to another. We'll see. We'll see how far we get after the break. We'll come back in just a little bit. All right, catch you on the other side. Okay, so this is now chapter 24. Probably one of the most taken out of context scriptures in the entire Bible. It's like this is the one that a lot of people really take out of context, and I'm just going to say very very starkly, this Bible was not written for 21st century America. Okay, there we go. It was at the time. Now I'm going to re-clarify what I'm saying here. Is we were talking about double entendres before. Now we're hitting the triple and quadruple entendres in this scripture. So that's why it's so easily taken out of its basic context. And there's a reason why here in verse 15 it says, reader, pay attention. There's a pay attention, watch, like that, just listen, because there were about 5 different things happening. Remember in Zechariah, when it said this is what's happening now as well as a preview of things to come. Very similar in that regard. However, pay attention. So, he said, not one of these will be used. Yeah, it's true. The temple did get destroyed very shortly thereafter, just 30 years. And so anyway, 40 years, but still. And he was, where did he sit? On the Mount of Olives again. And he is and his disciples said, tell us, when will all this happen? The things about. Now, this is what's happening. He's talking directly about when the temple is going to fall, as well as the more spiritual essence of things. He's sitting on a mountain. There's something happening here. Similarly to the high priest sitting at the right hand of God, but yet it's a preview of Christ to come. So this is a very similar idea. Don't let anyone mislead you. For many will come in my name. Many will come in my name claiming I'm the Messiah. They will deceive many, and you'll hear of wars and threats of wars, but don't panic. Yes, these things must take place, but the end won't follow immediately. So nation will go to war against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There's a lot of strife that happens shortly thereafter, as well as for millennia to come. So we're talking about there's a lot of strife happening. And even today, basically it's saying, don't get worked up. Don't work yourselves up when you hear of things that are happening, the things that might shake you. Stay strong. And there will be famines and earthquakes in many parts of the world, but all this is only the first birth pain, with more to come. Then you will be arrested, persecuted, and killed. This is a direct statement to the apostles, as well as a direct statement to the rest of the church. You will be hated all over the world because you are my followers. And many will turn away from me and betray and hate each other. Judas happened shortly thereafter. And it's repeated again and again, in the history of Christianity. And many false prophets will appear and will deceive many people. Sin will be rampant everywhere, and the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And the good news about the kingdom will be preached about throughout the whole world, so that all nations will hear it. And then the end will come. The day is coming when you will see what Daniel the prophet spoke about, the sacrilegious object that causes desecration standing in the holy place. Now, 2 things of historical note. One is there was an idol that was put inside of the holy place, as well as he's also seemingly making a point of about he just called the Pharisees you brood of vipers, and it's the object that causes desecration is standing in the holy place. Anyway, reader. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills. A person out on the deck of a roof must not go down to the house to pack. A person out on the field must not return even to get a coat. How terrible it will be for pregnant women and for nursing mothers in those days. He's talking about the direct results as well as the things to happen thereafter. people were, like, it was not, look at history in the past 2,000 years. I mean, come on. And pray that your flight will not be in winter on the Sabbath, for there will be greater anguish than at any time since the world began. And it will never be so great again. In fact, unless that time of calamity is shortened, not a single person will survive, but it will be shortened for the sake of God's chosen one. He's basically saying humanity is going to do what humanity is going to do, but just stay strong because it gets rough. Stay strong. There's a lot happening when it's really going to get and harder in ways that we can't imagine. So then if anyone tells you, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, don't believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will rise up and perform great signs and wonders so as to deceive, if possible, even God's chosen ones. I personally believe that we've been seeing a lot of false prophets recently. But I think they've always been there. It's like, think about like the Catholic Church back during the bubonic plague, or the things that people just do. People just do it. Like, things like the Inquisition, the Salem witch trials, the taming of the Native American savages, quote unquote. All the craziness that happens that humans just do in the name of God.
Yeah, white man's burden in the missionary field.
Right. It's like, and it's like it's very much like it's like many will say, Lord, Lord, but he's like, I don't know you. Like, you're doing things that aren't that type of thing. Anyway, so he's over there. He's hiding there. Don't go. For as the lightning flashes in the east and shines to the west, so it will be when the Son of Man comes. Just as the gathering of vultures shows there's a carcass nearby. That's an interesting image. So these signs indicate that the end is near. So immediately after, he's talking about the Messiah. He's talking about the things that people he's talking about us. He's not talking about the world. He's talking about Israel as well as the church. He's talking about what we do within, and it's like so often misconstrued to talk about what the world does. And he said, yeah, the world's going to do terrible things, even from within, because it is those who are within that will say, the Messiah is over there. This is how you follow the Messiah. Go and do these things. And he goes, some people like to sit in high places, or and then they proclaim certain things, and they love to get that mentality is what is at stake. And he calls that a snake that needs to be crushed. So anyway, and it's not necessarily the people themselves. It is that mentality. And so immediately after the anguish, the sun will be darkened and the moon will give no light. The stars will fall from the sky and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. There are a couple of other references of this in the Old Testament. One of them has to do with when Babylon fell. And so it has to do with, the sun will be darkened. This is like a Genesis image here, because he said, let there be light, and there was the sun, and then he made the sun, and then the moon to govern the night, and then he made the stars. They will fall from the sky, and the stars are the Elohim, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. So at that time, everything of the other Elohim will be shaken. And then at last, the sign that the Son of Man is coming will appear in the heavens. And there will be a deep mourning among all the peoples of the earth. Mourning. They don't want it to happen. They're like, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Who didn't want Christ to happen when he was right in front of them? So, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with the mighty blast of a trumpet, and they will gather his chosen ones from all over the world, from the farthest ends of the earth and heaven. Now learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, you can know his return is very near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will not pass from the scene until all these things take place. It's true. Not a generation passed before everything that they knew crumbled around them. Anyway, heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. And that's, once again, a correlation of things to come. Heaven and earth come back together. However, no one knows the day or hour when these things will happen, both in terms of when the temple falls, as well as when the other temple falls in the future. Anyway, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself, only the Father knows. When the Son of Man returns, it'll be like it was Noah's day. In those days before the flood, the people were enjoying banquets and parties and weddings right up to the time Noah entered his boat. People didn't realize what was going to happen. But wait a second. How is that true when you have all the earthquakes and the floods and the wars and the rumors of wars? Pay attention. So anyway, that is the way it will be when the Son of Man comes. 2 men will be working together in the field. One will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding flour at the mill. One will be taken, the other left. So this has to do with wartime imagery, like the war is going to come at any moment, as well as the end will come. And heaven and earth will be. It is a lot of depth, really interesting. So you too must keep watch. For you don't know what day your Lord is coming. Understand this: if a homeowner knew exactly when a burglar was coming, he'd keep watch and not permit his house to be broken into. You must be ready at the time for when the Son of Man will come, when least expected. Pay attention. A faithful, sensible servant is one to whom the master can give the responsibility of managing his other household servants and feeding them. If the master returns and finds that the servant has done a good job, there will be a reward. Foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. To tell you the truth, the master will put that servant in charge of all he owns, but what if the servant is evil and thinks the master won't be back for a while, and then he begins beating the other servants, partying and getting drunk? The master will return unannounced and unexpected, and he will cut the servant to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, the actors. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, the anger from them. And so I think when it says that it will be the least expected time when things will happen, I believe that. So, anyway, and then we have the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. I know it's pretty self-explanatory. And it's just more like an amplification, an illustration of the same thing that was being said there. The parable of the 3 servants. It's interesting. The one that didn't do anything with the coins. Actually willfully did so. This was not a short journey that the master made. It was a very long one, and it was more like, he didn't do anything, like nothing. And even if it is true that I am like this terrible guy, it's like then it's anyway. Anyway, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I'd lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. But the master replied, if you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. That's interesting. There's a lot to be said there, but I honestly don't think there's much in terms of a scribal understanding of things. And I think it's pretty well understood, this whole section. And then you have the final judgment. Then the king will say to those on his right, Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. From the creation of the world, the things that you inherit. But wait a second, Israel is God's portion. This is the beginning of the imagery of you're joining the right hand. You're part of the divine council. Like this is, the imagery is coming back now. For when I was hungry and you fed me. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger and you invited me into your home. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you cared for me. I was in prison and you visited me. And then it's complete opposite. And it's like, okay, think about it. Just think about it. How many people in today's society will go on these massive events? But what actually happens there? Is anyone giving, like, truly given a helping hand? Like, or is it more just like the preaching against like the sins and all that type of stuff? It's like, but when you see someone who's hungry and you give them food, and there's someone that knocks on your door, you open it, and all that stuff. Like when I was in prison, you came to visit me. And it's like, think about how many people just don't bother with that stuff. Like it's yeah. And then I still shudder to think of like some of the local congregations when it comes to like the stardom that comes from from certain positions, and really sad. Yeah. Anyway, not to mention, there's currently there's like major issues happening in nearby congregations, and it's for like the one who's truly hurting. What help is there being given? So, if anyone knows what I'm talking about, listen. Like there is something. There is. Hold on. All right, so then we got in the last verse here in 25 it says, and then the ones who don't do, as I've taught, will go into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go to eternal life. What's the opposite of life? So it's like, it is clear that there is a resurrection. I personally believe, that the opposite of eternal life is eternal death. It's a punishment, right? The gift, the reward, it's like, well done, my good and faithful servant type of thing is life. And so, okay, the plot to, now that's my opinion. The plot to kill is, it's interesting that you have the woman that was willing to sacrifice everything, and she didn't care about like her what others were thinking, because all that mattered to her was Jesus. That is a huge point, like in terms of like what she did. There's a lot to be said in that one too. But and then you have Judas. He was in Jesus' inner circle. Don't forget that. He was a friend, but something happened where he felt it was more valuable to hand him over, to deliver him, to hand him over. And then you have the Last Supper. Passover, the normal thing that, there's like a whole ritual that goes into the celebration of Passover for Jewish people. Does anybody know, looking at the passage here, what is strangely missing from the table?
The lamb.
Exactly. the lamb is not there.
The lamb is at the table.
Exactly. And what are we to eat later? So but notice when in verse chapter 26, verse 18, as you go into the city, you'll see a certain man that wears like a long trench coat, and you go up to him and you give the secret password, which is, the teacher says, my time has come, and I will eat the Passover meal with my disciples at your house. It's not just some random person, right? Like, so anyway, they get there. It's like a whole secret meeting thing. This is a very, I think the symbolism there is very, very clear. Like, it's very clear. I would be surprised if people like don't understand like the general things here. But he'll strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. And and that's exactly what happens, isn't it? But he's still speaking somewhat in riddles. And before the rooster crows, Peter, you'll deny me 3 times that you even knew me. And then Peter said, no, of course not. I won't do that.
Never.
And then Christ goes to Gethsemane. Does anyone know what Gethsemane means? Anyone?
I heard that not too long ago, too.
Olive oil press. I defined it just to be sure. Olive oil press.
I was thinking Olive Garden, but I was afraid.
It's the garden of the olive oil
yeah.
press. Yeah, it's the garden of Gethsemane. Praise in the garden. There's like it's actually like a grove, and I think it's still there today, if I remember right. I think it actually is still there today, and I'll say this. It's clear that Christ was losing his mind at that point. I think a lot of churches say that he wasn't, that he had it all together. He clearly didn't. And he clearly was fearful. And he clearly was losing his grip. This was the closest he ever got to turning back. And we've talked about this before in previous sections. But then his friends wouldn't even stay awake to watch over him and to make sure that he would be okay. And this is a foreshadowing of when he is truly alone. When Judas comes up, the common greeting for peace and what is it? It's like peace and something is to kiss someone. And how ironic it is that Judas is the one that gave him a kiss. And then Peter takes a sword and slices off Malchus's ear. And Christ said, "Those who live, if you live by the sword." Okay. Those who live by the sword, whoa, it got really dark in here. So, those who live by the sword will die by it. And anyway. And it says, "Am I some dangerous revolutionary that you come with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there teaching every day." But this is all happening there. It's like you're doing it in secret. That's the slick maneuver. And so the whole thing here is when it comes to I'm mentioning Peter for a reason here, though, because it goes back to when Peter says, "Well, how many times should I forgive? 7?" And Christ says, "No, 77." And he's referencing Lamech. And so when Peter, I don't think Peter's mentioned it. Is he mentioned in Matthew? Oh, yes, it did. Yeah. Put away your sword. Those who live by the sword will die. Okay, I thought it was also in John. If you live by the sword, will die by it. Who lived by the sword was Lamech. Who lived by the sword was David. Who lived by every time you have blood on your hands, the blood's crying out. It's all of it. I talked about this at length, but it's so important. We should never have the sword in our hands ever. That is so messed up to say that to say otherwise. The yeah but statement. It's okay, clearly when you're talking about who Christ is, he calls us to do so many things that are not normal. the sword is also one of them. And if we pick up the sword and feel as if it's appropriate to kill someone, that is so not God. So much so that Christ actually says, if you look at someone the wrong way, you're killing them. And it's something we should all look at. Like, it's, yeah. Oh, Jesus. Anyway, so, now, when he goes and he testifies, first of all, you got to understand, he had an exhausting night. And when he says, you have said it, like, where he says, I demand in the name of the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. He said, you have said it. This was said, from what I understand, in the Greek, it's basically saying, when he says, like, you say so, it's the inference is, yes, but not in the way that you think. And it's like you say it, but, like, do you actually understand it type of a thing. And that's when he said, and in the future you'll see the Son of Man, and they knew he referred to himself this way, in the place of power at God's right hand. We're talking about, like, the whole Jeshua thing and Zechariah. And coming on the clouds of heaven. And
so the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand.
Yeah, that's the other one too. Yep. And then the high priest tore his robe, right? And when that happened, there was actually an interesting inference that I didn't really quite, hold on. It's symbolic, although it's unbeknownst to him, of the ending of the priesthood. And it's the priestly robes have been torn. Remember what else was torn when Christ was crucified? Was the veil. And so this is the moment. And then he's taken to and then he's whisked away. And then Pilate, the one who is so well known for killing so many, doesn't want anything to do with him. He washes his hands of it. And not to mention, there are two people that the people can choose from. One is named Jesus Barabbas, and the other one is Jesus Nazareth. And so you have the two choices that are here. The one Jesus literally means Yahweh saves, and then it's Son of the Father. Barabbas means Son of the Father. And then you have the other Jesus from the stick. And so the people choose. Oh, not to mention, Jesus Barabbas was actually more than likely a zealot that did uprisings with swords. If you live by the sword, you die by it. And they chose the sword. And when they chose it, what happened shortly thereafter? But the temple fell. And they chose their own fate. And so, anyway, and then when Peter denies Jesus 3 times, he, it's interesting because it's like, the sermon said, I don't think that the look that Christ gave Peter was that of disappointment. More than likely, it was one of understanding and compassion. I couldn't even imagine. It's, you have Judas hanging himself or having his guts spill out. There are 2 different accounts, but it doesn't matter. He died. He killed himself. And he repented to an extent. He didn't necessarily go to the Father for repentance, but he felt bad about it. He felt bad, guilty, and he took his own life. And it's so inconceivable for me to think of, like, imagine that weight of knowing that you turn the Son of Man over to the forces that I can't even imagine. Like that, yeah, the whole thing was, so one of his best friends betrayed him. So then Pilate says, are you the king of the Jews? And Christ says, you say so. And this is the same thing coming back, like you say it, but you don't quite understand it. And then they had the whole, and so when they actually brought him to when they mock him, they actually mock worship him. And this is a signal to find out when he was put on the cross, this is his throne. He is put on the top of a hill. There is someone that sits at his right as well as on his left. But before that happens, he's beaten to the point, and he's exposed. Like, there is no covering of his shame, and so it's ripped away, and he's put on this piece of wood from a tree that serves as his throne, because on that tree he goes up. And as he does so, you have a thief on one side and a murderer on another. Those are who sit at his right and at his left. And when he is there, things get dark. So dark in that sense that he's abandoned by his friends. They scatter. He's abandoned by society at large. The world, the empire killed him. It's the entire, everything, and he's layered on with sin. And the Father leaves him for 3 hours. Like that, he is so bitterly alone, betrayed, emptied, and the whole thing is that he is the Passover lamb, and it's his blood that goes over the doors of our hearts, and it's his blood that pours forth, in the sense that when he struck, and you have the water and the wine coming forth, there's a lot of imagery playing there. You have his being so alone, but still saying, "Forgive them," because they don't really understand what they're doing. And that when we think about, when we are in a state of being alone, we can identify with him if we hold on to him, because he was the most alone. If you get what I'm saying. I personally don't think that it's possible to be more alone. And so whenever we, this has been a great solace to me, is whenever we feel alone, that we hold to him because he understands it. And before he didn't. Before he didn't. And this is Emmanuel, God with us. He brought him to get the crown. He went through humiliation. And we're called to do the same thing. And it's that, I don't know if I'm being clear in a certain sense, that it's how it's so anti-Christian to think that God doesn't understand what I'm going through right now, or to this is where it's he understands more than we can ever imagine what it's like to be lost, and he did it for us, and so we're called to do the same thing for him. And that's the love behind what happened with his crucifixion. He died. And imagine when and that's another thing. It says specifically that he gave his spirit up. It wasn't that it wasn't taken from him. It says specifically that he gave his spirit up. He died. And imagine, because he said, forgive them for they don't know what they're doing. Imagine what those who were with him were thinking. That all the things he taught, all the things that were for 3 days, however you slice it, if it's really however you slice it, for quite the while, he's not there. And imagine what the women were thinking when they were watching his tomb. Notice too that it says only the women stay behind, and John. There's also John that was there, but like all the others weren't there. When Joseph himself left after, and it's funny. There's an interesting thing there. It's like obviously camels can go through really tight places because Joseph happened to have a tomb, and that was very strange for anyone who was crucified to have a proper burial. And so he had a proper burial, and the women watched it. Imagine what they were thinking when I can't even. And so only imagine how much he shocked them when he came back. Like when there's like an angel sitting there going, he ain't here. Like, not with. So,
No.
No. There's a meme where it's like you have like this lady in a cartoon series where it's like she's known for saying no, he's not here, and so so you have. So it's like there's like the meme with the cartoon character standing in front of like the empty tomb, and there she is going, no, he's not here. Mr. Jesus is not here. But seriously speaking, so he comes back. And the first thing he says is, don't be afraid. I'm sorry. What? I think it's probably the 50th time that has happened in Scripture, for obvious reasons. The angel said, don't be afraid. And it said, I know you're looking for this guy, but he ain't here. He's risen, just like he said. Come, see where his body was lying, and now go quickly and tell his disciples. And the women ran, and they were frightened and filled with joy, and they rushed to give the disciples the angel's message. And then Jesus met and greeted them. What was the first thing they did was they worshipped him. And then he said, don't be afraid. Go tell my brothers to leave for Galilee, and they'll see me there. The moment on their way, some of the guards went into the city and told the leading priests what happened. A meeting with the elders was called, and they decided to give the soldiers a large bribe. And they said, you must say Jesus' disciples came during the night while we were sleeping, and they stole his body. And then it comes to like the potter's field, right? And I actually have the perfect thing to explain like a similar way of thinking. So the field is considered a place. Not the potter's field. There's stories where rather than one that's used. I forgot to mention something about like the field that was used where Jesus was where Jesus' body was. It's kind of like this is not in this story, but like with the Judas story thing. You know, like when like certain gas companies have like large oil spills, and it was, oh, that's terrible. How could something like that happen? I'm going to go fill my tank. And it's that type of mentality. It's a very similar thing. I fall into that. It's like because you have to live in this world, but it's like it's a lot of stuff. Anyway, then the 11 disciples left for Galilee, going to the mountain where Jesus told them to go. And, hold on. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some of them doubted. And Jesus came and told his disciples. This verse was put there for a reason. I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. And he just came back to life. He's king now of everything. Now, he's king I have been given all authority in heaven and in earth. No longer, actually we have time. Give me 1 second, guys. Give me 1 second. I will come right back. Sorry, I had to respond to a text message. It was pretty urgent. So, all right. He said, I have been given authority. I have. Like, I am now king of all. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations. Baptizing them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you. And be sure of this. I am Emmanuel, even to the end of the age. He died for us. And he is Emmanuel because he understands us. He knows us. He's lived this life. He more than ever before. And the high priestly rule of Israel has ended. And the Jeshua has overtaken the position once held by the accuser. And he finds it's good to always remember that when we go to him humbly, he looks at us and says, neither do I condemn you. And because no one else has a leg to stand on, I have been given all authority and I don't condemn you. His gift is free. It's crazy to see how everything just really amplifies at this moment, where on a mount he's put on a tree, and it's from this tree that water flows. I wonder if that image pops up anywhere. That it's from this tree that water flows, as well as wine, and the fruits of the vine. And this is what we eat. And when he says, eat it, take, this is my body. This is my blood. This is what, and when we eat it, we consume it. Because at that moment, his sin, the sin that was in him, I mean to say, that he was sin embodied at that moment. And what did the Israelites do to that golden calf? They drank it. And that's what we're called to do, is we drink. And that when we're in Gethsemane, Christ says, let this cup of bitter suffering pass from me. But yet, he drinks it. And from him comes more drink that we drink. And there's a lot of imagery of everything just comes together in that. A lot of parallelism, a lot of layering of images. You see it happen when he was talking to the Pharisees, where he was saying one idea and another idea based on this idea, and the third idea that was really like a mirroring of this idea. So it's exactly the same thing when it comes to his sacrifice. And in this tree and we're called to bear the cross, this tree, this thing that became his throne. But it was at that time it was an object of his humiliation. And we are called to bear that same cross. Please never, never let anyone fool us that being a Christian is a life of fulfillment in the worldly sense. Because it certainly wasn't for Christ. But yet it definitely became his utter glory. And his glory, his heaviness, the thing that makes him more than all the others was that he identified with us all the more. Of every religion that you can think of, no God has ever died in order to save everyone like this and to identify with us and to marry us in that regard. There are copies that are similar, but not like this. it is, so as we look at this, I think one thing that's interesting too is like, he's already won, where it says, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. He's already won. We have a hope. And it doesn't matter if there are wars or rumors of wars, if there's earthquakes or things are happening around us, we stay firm and we stay solid. And even when things seem to be okay, we don't relent and we pull back or pull back. We hold tighter and we approach him all the more. And this, and it's so and this is the last thing I wanted to talk about. We talked before about how Christianity is about fighting the natural. And here we are being called to something that is supernatural. There's also something that is subnatural. Because we're looking at animals before and how they treat each other. This was also becomes quite in the sermon series here. Chimps can bash each other's heads in. Praying mantises eat their mate's head. Spiders eat their mate. You have like all the stuff that you have, like the crazy, like look at rabbits when they reproduce. Oh my goodness! And it's like all the stuff that Christ calls us not to do. And it's like, but it's natural if humans were to do some of the things like bash each other's heads in and stuff like that. There's also a subnatural aspect, an evil one where you sit there and you conspire ways to get something, such as like conspiring how to kill a brother or how to be cunning when taking something that was said not to be, that was quite clearly not yours to take, or conspiring of ways to have someone killed so that way you could have their wife, or or thinking of ways of seeing something that you want and taking it and hiding it, or yeah, you see where I'm going with it, or seeing seeing the great wealth of things and bringing it together and touting how, well, that is more natural because animals kind of do that as well. But like I'm talking about, there's a subnatural evil, something that calls us the other direction. May we go up and not go down. Let me go into the supernatural and not the subnatural. May we not spill blood in order to call forth our own desire to have something that is only perishable. There's a lot of reasons why things are said about the going up and the going down. And here, this is where it is. It's like you got the natural state, you got the stuff that's supremely evil, and then you got the stuff that turns tables on its head. Their head. There we go. Turn tables upside down. Overturns them. There we go. I love God. I love his message. And when we seem most alone, and when it seems as if, like, is it really true that the path that I'm following, I'm saying this as a collective, is it really true that the path that I'm following is really what he wants? There's no doubt when you think of all the things that he's done and all the signs that he's shown. And with his power, the sun doesn't shine as brightly, and neither does the moon. And the stars fall, and we join Christ at his right hand, and we marry him and become one with him. I love God just for that very reason. And that's all I got. That's all I wrote for today. So, are we gonna have a comment section before we pray out, or anything like that? If not, that's fine. We can just pray out. Okay. Let's go ahead and give it to him then. Thank you for showing us a narrow path. To actually show us what that narrow path is. For calling us out of the mundane affairs of this existence, as well as those that are below these mundane affairs. Thank you for loving us and showing us how to love others. Thank you for when you saved us that the powers of the air just scatter when we hold tighter to you. Thank you for teaching us to love ourselves. Thank you for loving us more than we can love ourselves. Thank you for showing us how to love our neighbor. And then from that, learn how to love you all the more. Thank you for proposing your marriage to us, for becoming engaged with us, and promising that you went back to that house Thank you for being one with us when we're the most alone. Thank you for allowing us to stand up and when it seems as if everyone is against us. If you're for us, who can be? May we always be for you in return. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for allowing us to sacrifice for you, as well as for those around us. Thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for being with us, being God with us. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.